Okay.
Hello, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to the third session of our interview series on the edited volume International Studies in the Philippines, Mapping New Frontiers in Theory and Practice, published by Routledge. Today, we are interviewing Brian Doce, author of the chapter Religious Expertise, Public Theology, and Philippine Regime Compliance. Brian Doce is currently working in the Manila Economic and Cultural Office, the Philippine de facto embassy in Taiwan, serving as a project officer for bilateral educational cooperation. Aside from his diplomatic work, he is also teaching courses in political science and international relations at the De La Salle University. His research interests include global resurgence of religion, everyday politics, international norm socialization, and regime compliance. Conducting the interview will be myself, Francis Cruz, and Dr. Nassef Adiong, both from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and editors of the book. Good afternoon, Brian, and we hope you're doing well.
Good afternoon, Frankie. Good afternoon, Dr. Nassef. Thank you very much for this opportunity for me to share some of the background and content of my book chapter contribution to our edited volume.
Perhaps you could talk a little bit about some of the factors, events, and experiences that have influenced you personally and shaped your thinking about the world and therefore also the chapter.
I think, well, this is a bit funny, but my interest in international studies was actually rooted in my fan or being a fan of Japanese anime. But I think the main reason why I did this book chapter contribution is my upbringing, because I would like to share that I have been in a Catholic school from elementary up to college, and then aside from that experience, because of that experience I became interested particularly on the field of politics and religion, which led me to become exposed or oriented to the argument, to the usual narrative that religion is a factor or a vestige of the past, that it has no place in our modern world. So as I had digged or look upon the current literature, I am actually delighted to see that there are new perspectives and approaches showing the different side of the narrative. Wherein recent literature or recent works also showed or presented that these religious actors or religious institutions are also are also can also become instruments to reverse that the those those unfortunate events in the past, which were in these religious institutions have contributed, like war, human rights abuses, and different kinds of conflicts. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps you could elaborate then on the thesis and main arguments of your chapter in relation to your background.
Okay. So actually, my book chapter contribution is originally a part of my master's thesis in Jilin University in China, because the main motivation behind this work is that notice, I'm not saying that there's something wrong
Brian?
with for hello, can you hear
Okay,
me?
all right.
Hello.
Yes, please continue, Brian.
Sorry. So yeah, so the main motivation behind this book chapter contribution is a part of my master's thesis in China. And then the motivation behind it is that I noticed that majority of my colleagues or classmates there was they usually wrote their thesis topics employing different foreign policy approaches. And then I'm not saying that there's something wrong with that, but I want to do something different. So I look on other approaches, like in liberal institutionalism and constructivism, which I found this literature about epistemic communities. And then I found that in the course of my review of related literature, I found that there's a certain article that argued that religious actors are also considered as epistemic community. So I tried to contextualize that in the case of the Philippines, as the Philippines is one of the, although I'm not saying that it's primarily religious, but the role of religious institutions are very influential in public policy making and in political affairs. So I try to contextualize that. Wherein from that process, I arrived in this situation where I formulated this research puzzle which looks on the role of religious actors in the compliance of the Philippines towards two development regimes. When I talk about regimes here, I am referring to the regime theory defined by Stephen Krasner, wherein these are usually bodies of agreements or bodies of agreements that provides rules, norms, and the factors on behavior of states which they need to comply. And then I use these two regimes, the Millennium Development Goals and the CEDAW, or the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. So as I have reflected on the presence of these two regimes during the Benigno Aquino III administration from 2010 to 2016, I I realized that these two regimes are persuading the Philippines to legislate two laws um, that will address development problems, particularly in the case of reproductive rights and gender equality. In the case of the MDGs, I created a premise that the passage of the reproductive health goals is a form of compliance for the MDGs. Sorry, reproductive health bill as a form of compliance to the Millennium Development Goals, and the passage of a marriage dissolution bill or divorce is also considered as a form of compliance to CEDAW. And then upon looking on that, I tried to construct a comparative case study design wherein I arrived in this research puzzle that despite similar international and domestic support between the two cases, why is it that it is only reproductive health bill was able to pass the Congress deliberations during the time of Noynoy Aquino. And then I look on different factors wherein I arrive in this hypothesis that there's a difference of the degree of support from the progressive religious actors between the two cases, wherein in the case of the RH bill, the progressive religious actors are united. On the other hand, in the case of the divorce bill, they are fragmented in terms of their support. And then I was able to trace the development of them as I applied which is the central argument of my book chapter, stating that in the case of the reproductive health bill as a form of they are successful in to emerge as an epistemic community. On the other hand, because of the fragmentation of support towards their belief on the necessity of a marriage dissolution law, they fail to emerge as an epistemic community.
Okay. Thank you for sharing, Brian. How do you think that what you've written in the chapter will contribute to general knowledge of international studies in the Philippines, which is the theme of the book?
I think it has a contribution on the general belief, on the general idea here in the Philippines that conduct or international studies, we need to look on usually on foreign. We are being confined on the assumption that we need to, that if we write a research about IR or IS, we need to frame it on the lenses or on the assumptions of foreign policy analysis or security issues or even to hard issues of economic development. I think the study of IS in the Philippines must have this. They must. the researchers should also have this daring attitude to try other topics, to try other approaches, especially the Philippines being a small state, or some consider it as a middle power. The concerns of war, of state competition has not been an essential part of our day-to-day international affairs, and the prevalence of different non-traditional security issues, which usually require interstate cooperation, those issues that cannot be addressed by a specific state alone, or those issues that need the assistance of other non-state actors like regional or international organizations, multinational corporations, or even with, in my case, religious actors, they must be also considered.
Okay, thank you for that, Brian. I think we'll come to Nassef.
Hi, Brian.
Hello.
It's a very insightful contribution to the international studies edited volume. Now, with your contribution to the international relations in the Philippines, what advice can you provide to the students and probably young scholars like yourself in the Philippines regarding international studies as a field of knowledge and as a profession?
I think my advice would lie on the suggestion that we should not be discouraged, we should not become afraid if our track or the path that we need to pursue in our academic development will be different from the other tracks or pathways the others are currently pursuing. And then aside from that, I think it is very important, especially for young academics like me, to really cultivate our research interest, and we need to really find our own niche in in our ano, in our in our quest to establish our contributions to the idea of studying IS. And however, I admit that that kind of advice is really idealistic. So I also advise to other young academics to also consider the pragmatic issues. Uh, yeah, to also consider the pragmatic issues that they will encounter as they develop their own research or as they accomplish their respective research projects. So I usually think on a balance, or the middle way, on the balance approach in having a compromise between our research interests and then the pragmatic issues that we will face as we develop or accomplish these aspirations.
Thanks for that, Brian. And our last question, what are your thoughts on how international studies in the Global South, particularly in Southeast Asia, can move forward, advance, and have a conversation with the mainstream Western international relations?
I think the main strategy here should address the current generation of students who want to study international study. Yeah, who want to specialize in international studies. I think this is our main audience or target, that they must be introduced to different approaches that we have right now in the present. So as I have watched the interview with Alan Chong, I noticed that I observed that he said that, for example, the theory of realism was a theory for the 1990s or 1980s for the nationalist forefathers. So I think it is a good recommendation for the younger students to be exposed both to the mainstream IR approaches, to the emerging approaches that we have right now, and then allow them to reflect on the merits and demerits of both two camps, uh, and then yeah, allow them to appreciate and reflect on those. And then I think it's also a good strategy that we need to, although we need to be critical on the dominant or the homogenizing or the on the imposition of Western assumptions as we conduct our research. I need we also, similar to my advice to the previous question, we need also to temper that so that we can have a meaningful and engaging conversation with the mainstream Western IR theory.
Thanks, Ryan. So I'll give the floor to Frankie now.
Thank you very much, Brian, for sharing your thoughts with us today and talking about your contributions in your chapter. Please stay tuned, everyone, for more interviews from International Studies in the Philippines and FISO, and see you soon.